Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm here. How about you?
I'm doing great this morning. It's a rainy day, but still glad to be around to experience life today. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we'll be talking about Memorial Day by honoring those who have transitioned by sacrificing themselves for the greater whole. Join in as we discuss topics like selfless service and universal order. Why do we have war? Is it possible to have peace on earth? And if so, how can we make it happen? We'll show how Kriya Yoga can be used to resolve all inner conflicts that will serve as the origins of a new global condition of harmony. So learn how to use a perfect practice of Kriya Yoga to get the light in your soul, to initiate the progressive cycle, and become the change you want to see. So peace on earth, pray on prana, and become good. So Swami, what I thought I would first do, like I usually do when we have a topic, is try to give like a little bit of a history and kind of talk about Memorial Day. And Memorial Day is actually a federal holiday, obviously in the United States, for remembering the people who died while serving in the armed forces. But it actually originated as Decoration Day, which was right after the American Civil War in 1868. The Grand Army of the Republic, which was an organization of the Union, established it as a time for the nation to decorate the graves of the Union war dead with flowers. But by the 20th century, the Union and the Confederate holiday traditions each had their own. They celebrated on different days. They actually had merged and it had become Memorial Day. And then we know that Memorial Day kind of marks the beginning of summer, and then we have Labor Day that marks the end of the summer. So that's kind of like a brief history on Memorial Day. So we're going to celebrate Memorial Day Kriya Yoga style today. So let's start off. So I'm thinking about, when I think of Memorial Day, I think about people who have given service to their country, and then when I think about service, I think about Dharma, and I think about, people are chosen or they choose a certain field to fulfill some kind of a Dharma in this lifetime. What do you think about that? Can you expand upon that concept for us?
Well, sure. Dharma has a lot to do with what we call collective purpose, that the universe gives us life, but it does expect us to give back at some point. And each and every one of us does something better than anybody else. So a big part of the human experience is developing yourself as an individual, cultivating your unique talent. And then, of course, when it comes time for us to give back, then we're equipped. Now, what's collectively seemingly happening is that we're not growing psychologically and spiritually. So we're surviving. We're chronologically aging, but psychologically, spiritually remaining in this underdeveloped state. We don't really get out of infantile defense mechanisms, that the average person today is making all of their decisions based on what they think other people want them to do, that we're secretly seeking approval in our decision-making, which stems back to infantile defense mechanisms. And a big part of human development is we have to separate from this original pattern that we come in with. And we join with a resource of energy that actually produces a progressive cycle. It produces growth of consciousness, the expansion of the identity, and it really changes the individual into a human that seeks things that are visible and tangible to a human that seeks this invisible, intangible resource. So there's a lot that goes on, and there's a lot that when you cross-examine it that is missing in our socialization today. Mm-hmm. And of course, the concept of selfless service has very different meaning to the human in the adult state as it does to the human in the larvae state. And that's one of the things that we really talk about here is the difference. The major difference is it's really not about the conduct, it's all about the connection. It's about what energy field do I draw from? What is it that I personally desire? Because it will change who you are. And to become an individual and to have a sense of unique talent, to have a sense of collective purpose is optimal in your position of performance.
Mm-hmm. So what you just said, that's actually pretty loaded. We could talk about all day about some of those things that you had just talked about. But selfless service and Dharma, I think, is a topic that people are striving for. Like, they don't understand what their Dharma is and how do they find it, and and then it leads me to wonder why people do what they do. Like there are different motivations for people to do whatever it is that they do. And since we're talking about Armed Forces today, Memorial Day, what motivates people to go into the service? I mean, we talk about Dharma, of course, but maybe it's fear of the enemy. Maybe it's not understanding somebody else's culture. Like when we had 9/11, I wonder how many people were spurred to join the armed forces to fight back, so to speak, and fighting back against a whole culture as opposed to just this one person that had created that the terrible bombings and things like that.
Well, to answer your question, I mean, there's a lot of things that you're looking at, and the biggest variable, I think, is an individual's level of consciousness and their degree of awareness. Because, like you said, most of us are really driven by fear, which is basically our lowest level of consciousness. And however that manifests itself for you as an individual will be very individual. Because some people join the armed forces because they are inspired to defend, their liberties, which is a very noble kind of position. And then others join the armed forces because it's mandatory. You get drafted, and now all of a sudden it's not exactly what you had intended or wanted, but you find yourself in a position where, again, you're kind of like the victim, that something is happening to you. And trying to make the most of that, of course, again, there's a difference between somebody who is doing this from a level of consciousness where they are growth-based as opposed to a level of consciousness where they are survival-based.
Well, it's interesting that, if you have somebody who's drafted into the service, so as opposed to somebody who willingly signs up for it, is their Dharma being forced for them, or is this all part of universal order, that this is something that they were supposed to do, and the only way that they were going to join the services in this case was to have this draft, to force them into what it is that they were supposed to do?
Yeah, those are really kind of interesting questions. But again, what we're really trying to find is what's my level of consciousness? What's my degree of awareness? What is it that motivates me? Because the first time we did this show on Memorial Day, we talked a lot about the Bhagavad Gita and how it takes place on a battlefield, and the whole thing of what goes on with Arjuna and Krishna, and how it's not so much what you do, but your level of consciousness, your degree of awareness during whatever it is that you're doing. And that's one of the things that I think that's really important to understand, is that we could be doing the exact same thing at a different level of consciousness and a different degree of awareness. And it's all going to be determined by what energy field I draw from. Going to have a lot to do if you still see yourself as a separate entity, or if you have aligned yourself with a part of yourself that is expansive and growing, and you see yourself as an intricate part of something bigger than just a separate entity. And the level of consciousness of an individual that's growing has a much greater sense of awareness of what it is that they're putting out. That's one of the things that we always talk about. I mean, the warrior is not a brutal murderer, but is the defender of truth, honor, and nobility.
It kind of reminds me of a cartoon when I was a kid. There was a superhero cartoon, and they were defenders of exactly what you said, defenders of truth, and I just thought that was kind of funny. But to expand upon what you were saying, we were talking about Arjuna on a battlefield, and he's trying to cope with the fact that his countrymen on both sides, of the battlefield, aren't going to make it through the day. That people that he knows and loves and grew up with, and so on and so forth, they're going to die, and he really struggles with that. And it's when he is schooled on a battlefield, he starts to understand that this is his duty, this is his dharma. And I think if we have an understanding that whatever it is that we do every day, that is our duty, that's our dharma, like you say, we think about things in different level of consciousness, it makes our work different. It doesn't seem like work anymore. It seems like not necessarily fun in the case of being on a battlefield, but I'm talking like everyday work in like this country. It just gives us a different perspective on everything that we do, putting God first. That's our purpose.
Well, having a sense of purpose is probably one of your better motivators. That nothing will engage you in your life more than something that gets you out of yourself. The pain, pleasure, control dramas of your own physical body. And again, gets you out of fear-based motivation. But the whole thing with Arjuna, too, is that the major lesson in the Bhagavad Gita is basically you have to understand that on a spirit level, nobody's born and nobody dies. That everything is one. And that's a really important perspective to literally understand, so that you can actually find yourself in maybe more challenging situations, but be able to deal with them from, again, a different level of consciousness and a different degree of awareness.
Well, it is about that time, so we're going to hold that thought, pause to hear a word from our sponsors, so listeners will be back in a few moments.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate.
If you are looking for a Samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Starting with the separation from mother, including the labors and tasks of the hero and the return as a whole person. Practice makes perfect only when practice is whole. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. Samadhi, or total consciousness, is experienced by knowing and doing with devotion. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
And welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So at this time, we're going to open up the phone lines. So if you have any comments or questions or curiosities that you would like to comment about and ask Swami any questions, you'll be able to ask them anytime. All right, so Swami, I do have a comment that I want to talk about. And we saw a movie last night called Little Boy, and it was about this family back in World War II, and the father has to go to war because his son ended up not being accepted because he had flat feet. And the young boy, 8-year-old boy, sorely misses his father, and he ends up in the church talking to the priest, and the priest gives him a list of things that he has to do to bring his father home, let's say, from the war, bring him back safely. Or that's how the child views this list anyways. He thinks that if he performs all the things on this list, he'll be able to get his dad to come home. It was a great movie. But what it got me thinking was Memorial Day is service to our country, but then what about service to God, service to the universe, that type of thing? And so the items on this list, according to the priest, were, he called it like the sacred list. If you do all these things, then, things will happen for you. And so he gives this list to Pepper, the young boy, and the list is feed the hungry, visit the sick, visit a prisoner, clothe the naked, bury the dead, and shelter the homeless. And then he added one more on there, and he added befriend this other character in the movie. His name was Hiromito or something. And it was a Japanese fellow that lived in town and had lived in the United States for 40-some-odd years, but because he was Japanese, there was a lot of hatred. So it got me thinking about dealing with hatred and dealing with, well, what is it all about? And I think you said it earlier that hatred stems from fear, and fear of the unknown, fear of a different culture. And so the boy is so angry with the Japanese because he knows his father's fighting the Japanese, and that's why the priest makes him befriend this Japanese man. And they end up actually becoming pretty good friends, but it's all in not really understanding what that culture is all about. And so then I was thinking about that's how maybe some of us are in this country about Muslims. People just don't understand that their culture and a lot of things that are in their religious works are in the same thing in ours, but we just don't understand. We don't understand the difference. And so I thought that it was really important to talk about something like that, talking about the fear and the anger and what drives that and how to overcome that.
Yeah, coming back to what we talk about, one of the major things and responsibilities of a religion or things like yoga was to educate human beings in how to get out of duality, how to get out of fear and limitation, because that's what we always mention is the physics of spirituality. See, like attracts like. And if you draw from fear and limitation, that's what you become. And so when your mind is small and you see yourself as a separate entity, you're very susceptible to these prejudices. And the major antidote really comes with the progressive cycle, where you separate from your attachment to duality, fear and limitation, and you join with truth and wholeness, which now opens your mind, expands your identity beyond the limits of seeing yourself as separate. And from that broader perspective, it changes everything, because now you recognize that, what you're putting out is what you're getting back. That what you do unto others is really what you're doing unto yourself. But it's one thing when you are so self-absorbed and you don't see that, as opposed to when you like yourself and your identity has transcended the limits of seeing yourself as separate. And so a big part of, I think, affecting the changes that we really want to create is we're going to have to revisit our religions, because they're definitely not doing what they were intended to do. And we're not producing a population of humans that are growing psychologically and spiritually. And so as a result, most of our advice comes under the heading of laws and obligations and based on conduct. But one of the things that we do try and remind people is that humans in the adult state are virtuous by nature. It's not something that you any longer have to try to do. That it's not really about the connection. It's not really about the conduct. It's all about this connection. And it's all about the physics of spirituality. But you can't draw from fear and limitation and expect to become truth and wholeness. Mm-hmm. And that's what collectively, globally, is what we seem to be trying to do.
I think in our Western civilization that there are so many things that people are dealing with that creates a lot of fear for people and a lot of anxiety. Like you say, it can be really physical. Your heart starts to race, and you get sweaty, and it's a true feeling that people have, this fear-based, because I think anxiety stems from fear. So if we know that happens, how do we, if we're in the throes of this anxiety, this fear, how does somebody overcome that? What's like the first thing that they need to do to overcome that? Obviously, I think probably just realize that that's happening, but then what?
Yeah, a big part of trying to understand that is you have to recognize there's interplay between a physical body, an astral mental body, and a causal spiritual body. And the physical body itself has all the power. The body has the power of preservation and survival. And that's one of the reasons why when we are in some sort of crisis or panic, we feel it in our physical bodies. Like you said, your heart's racing, your hands are sweating, and it's as if a saber-toothed tiger just stepped into the room and is going to devour you. But you have to understand that you can't have a feeling without a thought. And so a lot of it is patterning and it's conditioning. We've trained our bodies to look for certain things. Now, the major problem with the physical body is that it does have all the power of preservation and survival, but it's blind. It has no vision and no power of discernment. So we can internalize anything and then elevate it to a position of importance that if you don't have it, you're going to die. And that becomes the dynamics of all of our addictions, all of our prejudices. And so then you peel it all back to the secret to life. That this whole thing of to condition your body to get accustomed to looking for what it really does need, your number one need, as a symbol that will produce a feeling in the body that I'm okay. And that very basic and simple concept is the underpinnings of all of our religions. That we were to separate from our attachment to things that were visible and tangible, which would keep our minds small and our feelings reduced to these insatiable cravings, and attach to something that would produce a different return. This progressive cycle that would expand my identity and change who I am. Because again, when an individual is growing psychologically and spiritually, then they're out of all the unnecessary fears. And they're able to see things from this broader perspective, which then gives you a better chance of making much better decisions consistently.
You just reminded me of when we're talking about harmony and being the change that you wish to see. That might be a good time for you to recite the Chinese proverb for us, the light in the soul.
Oh yeah, when there's light in the soul, there's beauty in the person. When there's beauty in the person, there's harmony in the home. When there's harmony in the home, there's honor in the nation. And when there's honor in the nation, there's peace in the world. But it all stems back to, what does it look like when I have a light in my soul? What does it look like when I'm using what I really do need, my number one need, as a symbol for validation? Because that's when you're in bedrock. That's when the panel is wired. That's when you have joined with truth and wholeness. And that's what initiates this progressive cycle and starts this process that we call apotheosis, where the human is actually becoming divine.
And I would encourage our listeners to participate in our Series 2 class that we hold on Thursday evenings, and that kind of helps us, deal with yoga and applying that to our everyday life. So, Swami, I think it's probably nearing about that time when we have to start closing down our program. So I'd like to invite your listeners out there to visit our website. You can follow Swami on Pinterest and Twitter, and, of course, on Facebook. But be sure to visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com. Once there, you can post comments about this show or any other ideas for shows you may want us to consider. But keep those comments, questions, and curiosities coming, because Swami does enjoy hearing from you. Be sure to tune in next week. We'll have another great program for you. In the meantime, you can email me at lisa@ipdtransform.com with any questions or comments you would like Swami to consider. So, Swami, any final thoughts, comments about today's show?
Well, I would like to thank all of those that have served and are doing the very best they can to protect our liberties and our freedoms as we know them now, because I know that the change isn't going to happen overnight, and we're all doing the very best we can with what we know. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.